Test 1, 2, test 1, 2. Alrighty. Welcome to episode 238 of Backpacking America. So, this episode is going to be dedicated to July 4th just passing. It's a little belated, I know, but I wanted to tell a little bit about the philosophy on it, some historical facts, and I have this book. It's called Stuff Every American Should Know, and I got it from Cracker Barrel um, after the camping trip episode I did, and I was like, "Oh, this will be cute to read one day." And I never got to read it, but we're gonna read a little bit of it today. And what's gonna happen is throughout the episode, I'm gonna randomly just pick like a page and just start reading from it and make some comments on it, or maybe learn something new because I'm not fallible. I definitely have things to learn. So, first, I wanted to preface July 4th with a really interesting um, fact, and it's kind of a departure from how a lot of politicians and people in general in the United States act today. Um, a lot of the a lot of the founding fathers, a lot of the people that signed the Declaration of Independence, they ended up they were at risk. They were at severe risk by signing that document. Several of them were hanged and killed. Several others were beaten, abducted, brutally beaten, abducted, and killed. Others had their homes burned, their sons and daughters killed, their families harassed. They lost everything. Some people, they gave their entire personal fortunes to the funding of the Continental Army and the original treasury of the United States of America and died in rags. They truly believed in everything the United States stood for at that time, and it's a very big departure from uh how congressmen today act. A lot of congressmen today, they they don't necessarily have that same level of sacrifice. A lot of people are like, well, what's in it for me? And the same goes for the American people too. There were, farmers and um tradesmen and intellectuals that all stood in the Continental Army and were willing to give up their jobs and their careers for, you know, a concept, an idea. And a lot of people today, and I'm very I have 3 vaccines, right? And I remember during the COVID vaccine mandates, there were a lot of people that did quit their jobs, and there were other people that didn't quit their jobs because they're like, "Ah, I got to get the shot." Now, but I'm against the shot, right? They're like, "I gotta get the shot, but I'm against it." Now, you're either not really against it and you're just doing it for the fad, or you're doing it like, "Ooh, that still doesn't look that good on air. Let's do this." Sorry, I was turning on a light that I thought would be cool, but anyway, um there's some people that's like, well, when push comes to shove, are you actually serious about not wanting the shot? Or are you just saying that because you're just mildly uncomfortable with it, but you're like, whatever, it's a shot, I'm not gonna die. There were a lot of people that were, diehard patriots where they're like, I'm not gonna do this, I'm not gonna do that. And then they were wearing the mask, they're getting the shot, they're like, oh, the government will protect us. Um, a lot of there were people that also did give up everything. There were people that said, "No, you know what? I'm gonna quit being a firefighter or a police officer just because I don't want to get the shot. And I feel like this infringes upon my personal liberties, and I feel that um, it will inevitably lead to totalitarianism." And a lot of them did quit their jobs. A lot of cops did leave. A lot of firemen did leave. EMS, nurses. Some of them became personal trainers. I met a few of them. So, there's a lot of people today where they will still do that, but there's also an equal number of people that will, in a way, give up or cede their personal opinions or their feelings as people for something as minuscule as a job or a career or, just simply approval, for another person. And it's not a light decision. It's not a decision that one can make easily, but uh, it depends on what the issue is for a lot of people, I feel. And for the founding fathers, they stood up for, they risked their life and their liberty and their happiness and their money for a concept. And concepts are something that are very important to the human spirit. And sometimes you just have to take a risk for it, a risk for the concept. And I feel like we could all have something to learn from the founding fathers, where sometimes you just have to say "fuck you, no," and that's enough to push it forward. So I want to take a little read through here. Let's do stop. Okay, let's go to the right hand. So this is about Ronald Reagan. The 40th president was shot by John Hinckley Jr. outside a Washington, D.C. hotel in March 1981. Hinckley fired his .22 revolver 6 times. A Secret Service agent, a D.C. policeman, and the president's press secretary were all injured. Reagan was hit in the right lung by a bullet that ricocheted off the presidential limousine. The 70-year-old recovered fully from the incident, as did two of the injured men. Press Secretary James Brady was left seriously disabled by his injuries and later became a gun control advocate. Hinckley, who claimed to act to win the affection of actress Jodie Foster, was found not guilty by reason of insanity and confided to a D.C. hospital where he, well, at the time of this book, remains today. This was written in 2012. He has actually since been released from prison, and he has a YouTube channel where he just plays guitar and makes sings cover songs, and writes his own music. So that's where Hinckley is today. Uh, so this is kind of playing into what I was saying, right? Like even today, things are less. Not that things are less serious today, but people are less serious about their convictions today. And when people think about running for president or running for office, usually assassination, harm, harassment, those are things that are not really weighing on your mind when you're considering running for office. You're usually considering, how am I going to effectuate change? How am I going to make my money? How am I going to do this? How am I going to do that, right? That's what most people think. But there is still the risk. And when you're president of the United States, that risk is made abundantly clear to you as the days go on. Especially as you get further along in the campaign trail, and then you're like, oh, yeah, my life is actually in danger. And here's a man, Ronald Reagan, regardless of your thoughts of him, he put his life on hold for the betterment of the country. The presidency is a 24/7, 368 job. Yeah, there are more days in the year than there actually are when you're the president. Your life is effectually on hold. And that's a great responsibility that you have as president. And w- he almost died effectuating that role. He gave his life, and he almost died for his duty to the country and fighting for what he believed in and policies he believed in. And he almost died. If he wasn't airlifted to Walter Reed Hospital, he would have died in minutes. So, because he was airlifted so quickly and received medical attention right away, he was allowed to continue living his life into his 90s when he died of dementia. So, here's a man, he sacrificed so much to give to the country and up to his life. And fortunately he lived, but you know, that's the risk that happens when you come with leading a country or building a new country or starting a new project. And America in and of itself is built on that aspect of sacrifice, right? So, you look at, people that start businesses, people that start nonprofits, people that, volunteer their time, people that, work extra shifts to take care of their family. These are people that are sacrificing everything for the United States and, or their families or themselves. Like sacrifice is a big part of this country where, you can make riches and you can make everything, but it requires a level of sacrifice and commitment that, you don't really have an opportunity to exercise in other countries, or you may be able to sacrifice and commit to a lot and get nothing in return out of it. So, this whole country was based on a really big gamble where it was like, we're going to take on the biggest power in the world and do something that's never been done before and break away from it and form our own nation based on individual liberty and human progress and democracy. And that was seen as insane by a lot of the world at the time. And when the Americans actually started doing it, the world stopped and they watched in 1776. They watched as we took up arms against the English government. And even English people, English common people at that time, were generally supportive of America's independence movement. The real working class people, the merchants and all that, they sent delegations to the colonies to be like, hey, you know, the working people of England have your back. It was really the English monarchy that had such an issue with the United States. Um, and because of that dissent at home, there were a lot of protests at that time uh, that the English, uh, were protesting on behalf of the United States. Like, let them have a country, let them be free. Who cares? This is ridiculous. They just wanted to be a part of England anyway, initially, which is true. The United States really did want to just maintain, still be a part of England. We just wanted representation in Parliament because we were paying so much money towards England. We were significantly supporting her economy at that point. So we were especially baffled why we didn't have any parliamentarian representation. So that was the beginning of it. It was also over free trade rights and just stifling our development as a nation because we knew we could expand and make more money and do more things, but England was like, nope, you've reached the quota. And this comes from almost a century of being able to do whatever the hell we want. So you say for 100 years, yeah, develop as much as you want, and then you put a cap on our expansion and a cap on our productive output. That's going to create abhorrent economic conditions because when you stifle growth, and you can't expand, you lose business. So it's going to create poverty and such. So that's what the United States was dealing with. Let's see another roll around this book. Let's see here. 10 quotations that embody the American spirit. Quotation 1. The buck stops here. Harry S. Truman was a humble haberdasher from Missouri who became vice president and inherited the highest office in the land after President Franklin Roosevelt died in office in 1945. A friend presented the new president with a sign emblazoned with these words, which Truman proudly displayed on his desk and referred to in speeches. It was his way of saying that blame and responsibility for big decisions always fall on the president. So what's interesting about that, and I kind of want to run through these quotes because I think that they're actually pretty badass. Um, what's interesting about Harry Truman is that originally Henry A. Wallace was supposed to win the vice president, vice presidential primary for the Democratic Party, but the party apparatus wanted Truman. So what they did was they burned all the Wallace ballots and stuffed the boxes with Truman ballots so that he would win. Now, primaries are not federally protected elections. Parties don't need to do primaries. They need to have, there needs to be general elections and federal elections and all these other things. But there is no reasonable expectation of parties to, like, there's no crime for them rigging an inter-party election. There's a crime for rigging general elections and such, but there's no crime for messing with a party primary. But the buck stops here. Decisions always fall on the president. So, I mean, that's very applicable to what we're talking about in general throughout this show, right? Like business owners, for individuals, for community organizers and leaders. The buck stops here. If you're leading something and you're taking ownership of it, you are the end all be all, especially as a business owner, right? Um, which, that's like the biggest spirit of this country is that anyone could start a small business and lead it. The immigrants that run bodegas and small grocery stores and, these small boutique shops, they took the biggest risk of all by coming to a country they have no knowledge of, they have no family, no connections, and having to build that and then build a business on top of that where everything is on them. That small business association loan, that housing loan, or or they may not even be able to qualify for that. They may just be working at a construction site, saving as much money as they can, and then buying a little corner store and hoping to God that it works so they can send money home and then bring more family to work the store. That is the biggest risk. They're taking the absolute biggest risk, and the buck stops with them. The second quote, this one's a classic. I love this quote. Give me liberty or give me death. So these famous words were ascribed to Virginia orator Patrick Henry and became, what does it say? Emblematic of the American position at the start of the Revolutionary War. If Henry did utter them, and the exact content of the speech is debated to this day, they would have been spoken during a speech to the House of Burgesses in Richmond about a month before the first shots were fired at Lexington and Concord. Give me liberty or give me death. I think that these words have lost a lot of semblance to Americans today, and yet at the same time maintain them. I feel like we're all very afraid of government and we're very afraid of being fired and consequences. We're a very consequence oriented nation. And that's because we know the price of making the wrong decision because we've had to fight for freedom for so long and at the individual and collective level. But we can't lose sight of the fact that, liberty and freedom and democracy are things that must be fought with at all points. And we have to absolutely keep our wits about us when it comes to fighting for these things. Um, I think what's very interesting is we have to. I think what's very interesting about these things is that we have to maintain balance, right? Yes, give me liberty and give me death, but we have to be strategic about it. When it comes to building things in our personal lives and building things as a society. Passion is there, the freedom is there, but um the planning needs to be there too, and sometimes there's not really planning. A house divided against itself cannot stand. This is going to ring true too because of our political situation all over the place. Originally from the New Testament, these words might appear to describe the Civil War. They were in fact spoken by Abraham Lincoln in 1858, 2 years before he was elected president, in one of his most famous speeches given during an unsuccessful bid for a Senate seat. Lincoln presciently warned that the issue of slavery would lead to national disharmony and could threaten to tear the states apart. So this quote absolutely still references and stands true, you know, in the year 2023 for the United States. And it has been throughout our history ever since the Civil War. We have allowed so many social issues to divide us as a country, and we've allowed the rhetoric of um, that there will inevitably, and I put that in quotes, be a civil war against each other, and that we're going to take up arms against each other. And there have been multiple times where there have been riots and opposition groups throughout this country. There's been the Ku Klux Klan. There's been race riots. There's been immigration quotas that were incredibly racist and harsh. There have been, even in 2020, during the George Floyd protests, there was the LA riots of 1992, the Rodney King riots, and yet we've survived all of these. Um, but every time there's an instance like that, it always stokes fears of the house being divided. And what if we were invaded at a time like this, whenever one of those events happened? Would we be able to survive? And that's a question that everyone should be asking themselves and wondering if it's actually truly worth it to rip the house apart and fight amongst ourselves. Or is it more beneficial to unite together based on our common principles of liberty, democracy, and freedom and have a discussion and work it out diplomatically? Sometimes as evidenced by the Revolutionary War and the Civil War, a violent departure is necessary in a society. But is it truly necessary for the issues that we're facing today, where we can sit down and talk about the transgender issue, the um, the racism issue, which is vastly improved since the days of the Civil War? In case you haven't noticed, in 200 years, less than actually, we went from holding physical human beings in bondage and having laws on the books that said they are three-fifths of a person to now there are black millionaires and a black president and black congressmen and black generals and black business owners and leaders and community organizers. I mean, it's amazing. You have black trans people even owning businesses. 250, 200 years ago, that would be impossible. I'd say that's a major improvement, and that such harsh reactions aren't necessary when we can actually have these discussions. Speak softly and carry a big stick. So this one's a great one. Theodore Roosevelt used this phrase when he was still governor of New York. But its principles, careful negotiation backed by military might, embodied his as well as many other presidencies well into the Cold War era. Roosevelt, who ascended to the presidency after the assassination of William McKinley, was often depicted in political cartoons wielding a club. So that's just such a badass quote. When I saw that quote on the next page, that's what made me want to keep reading this for you guys. Um, That's also one of my favorite quotes. Have a strategy, but have the might to back it up. I think that applies very well today for our own military, but also for our own as a domestic society and at an individual level too. It's always important to have something in your back pocket to defend yourself when you need to make a stand or an exit or a departure. But be soft about it. Don't be brash. Don't say big words. Don't make a big show of force. Just know that the biggest show of force is acting like you don't have one and just being content and being very polite. I've noticed this too when it comes to looking at our adversaries overseas, looking at China or Russia and how they have these big military parades and they have these grandiose actions and demonstrations and military exercises, and then we have the United States Army that just does like a casual stroll down the street once every couple of decades, or our military ads are just pretty cool and badass. It's not like trying to prove a point. It's like, yeah, we're the best. Like, here we are. Here's all our equipment. We're not trying to do anything special or fancy. Um, the military is not used as a political tool or as a means to um, attack, political opponents or, you know, show force. It's just this is the United States military. We're out here. We don't have to do anything special for you to know that we mean it. We're going to speak softly and we're going to carry a mighty big stick. And then the most prophetic words of the century, of the 20th century, the later half. I have a dream. And this was said by Martin Luther King in 1963 when he gave his most famous speech in front of the Lincoln Memorial. And he improvised those words on the spot. And those words carry the will of a nation at that point in time when the nation was truly reinvigorated by imagination and dream and the willingness to look at liberty from a new perspective and keep pushing it forward and developing the nation, the dream to continue developing freedom and liberty for all. Absolutely fantastic speech, and it encapsulated the American spirit at the time. Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. JFK uttered these words during his inaugural speech in 1961, and that exhorted a nation of citizens to patriotic service. That quote got the whole country like, wow, what can I do for my country? What can I do to serve again? In some cases, for older people, if that not older, but maybe they were in their like 40s at that time, that served in the Second World War, like, wow, service doesn't end after the battlefield. And then for young people, service doesn't begin with the military. Service can start by anything. And, during his presidency, that's when, or maybe shortly after his presidency, that's when the moon, shortly after his presidency, when he was assassinated in 1967, we landed on the moon. Go west, young man. This phrase has been long attributed to Horace Greeley, a 19th century New York newspaper editor. Although the phrase's origins are still debated, it expresses the notion of manifest destiny, the idea that the United States was destined to settle from coast to coast by young Americans in search of opportunity. Manifest Destiny is a hotly contested subject. Um, the way I kind of look at it is the natives were going to have their land taken either by the English, the French, the Spanish, or us, and it was just going to happen anyway. Um, doesn't mean I necessarily agree with it, but people get conquered and oppressed all the time. The most we can do now is just honor the treaties that we signed, with the Native Americans and make sure they have clean drinking water on the reservations and not kill them. That that's really all we can do at this point. Giving land back doesn't make any sense because they don't even have the numbers. And a lot of them died in the fighting or from the initial diseases from explorers who didn't even have the initial intention of conquering and violently pushing them out. They just got sick because the natives never experienced old world diseases. So that's not even like an intentional thing. Uh, so yeah, there's that. Um, but going west too. West is a free area, and you go out there, you look at what the Mormons tried to build and what various other religious sects tried to build at the time because they were inspired by the landscape and the nature around them, much like the Native Americans were. And when you look at the West, you think free. When you look at Utah, Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, Oregon, um, California, you see freedom, you feel more free, and people out there have a different way about them. So go west, young man. That since the 19th century, that's been a real good sense of advice for anyone. I recommend going west. I've went out west to a few of the states out there. I went to Colorado, California, and Utah, and and I said Colorado. I recommend it. Most of them were great. I wasn't too much of a fan of Utah, but it's an interesting state. I was interested in the history of Utah, not in what I saw at Salt Lake City. Salt Lake City is much different than the rest of Utah. A penny saved is a penny earned. Ben Franklin actually wrote a penny saved is two-piece deer. Either way, his maxim on frugality speaks to the core of the American dream. If you work hard and are frugal, you can amass a fortune. And that's true. A lot of immigrants do that. They come here, they work very hard, they amass, a decent amount of money. They teach their kids to do the same thing, and then they make more money, and then they could take care of the family, and then it just skyrockets from there. I've seen it happen to my own family when we came to this country in the 1920s. It's happened to a lot of Latino families. It's happened to a lot of Asian American families who, in 30 years, their income doubles and triples, and then their kids and their kids' kids become more successful. Well behaved women seldom make history. Yes, this was penned by Harvard historian Louise Thatcher Ulrich in her first academic article as a young student in 1976. So, this has been seen on a bunch of different products and all that throughout the years, and it's been on mugs, t-shirts, planners, everything. And she's got a point. Think of Betsy Ross, Susan B. Anthony, Helen Keller, um, Michelle Obama. We have women that were essential in the Stonewall riots and in the gay rights movement. You've had women as essential in the labor movement and the Ida B. Wells absolutely essential in the anti-lynching campaign and pushing anti-lynching legislation through Congress. She was essential in that. Women have played an important role in the United States. In fact, during the Second World War, they were essential in carrying out wartime production. My grandmother was one of those women. My nanny, she would build bullets in the factories with her mother, and those bullets went over to the front lines and kept everything going. They kept businesses going here. They kept tax revenue coming in. They kept sporting events alive and schools alive. They educated the youth. Women are absolutely essential, and they very rarely make history. And at that time, my nanny, she was Italian, so an Italian American. And at that time, Italian Americans, especially Sicilian Americans, women, Italian American women and Sicilian American women did not work. It was looked down upon to work. And they faced pressure from the older men that couldn't serve in the wars uh, to not work. They said, "Why are you working? Don't work. You shouldn't work." Well, they wanted to work, and they contributed greatly to their country and became Americanized because of it, whether it be for good or bad. The downside to Americanization is that we lost our language along the way, but that was their choice, and they decided to do that, and that's another episode topic for another day. And then the last one from John Paul Jones, the story of John Paul Jones. I have not yet begun to fight. U.S. Naval Captain John Paul Jones, a short but scrappy Scotsman, uttered these words during a brutal sea battle against a British frigate during the Revolutionary War. Though his ship, the Bon Homme Richard, was burning and taking on water, Jones stubbornly refused to surrender. Luckily, the battle turned and the Brits surrendered to Jones shortly thereafter. His words embody both American stubbornness and bravery, the willingness to fight for, and the idealist refusal to give up on what you believe in. John Paul Jones was actually a he used to be a British naval captain, I believe, and he killed a guy on his ship over a disagreement. He got really, he just had disagreements within the British command structure, and he fled England and he jumped ship. He went to America and started fighting in the American Continental Navy and worked his way up to, I believe it said captain. He became a captain again, and he just was kick ass. He was like an American pirate. He was great. He was an excellent an excellent captain, and won many battles on the seas. And he is the embodiment of fuck you. He really is. And I think that there needs to be more of um a focus on that type of energy because if you really think about it, right? He is the quintessential he is those words, man. I've not yet begun to fight. Do you know how many people like I know in my life that are just like, nah, I haven't even started yet. Like, why are you telling me what I can and can't do? Like, a lot of my life, I feel, is kind of like that too, where it's like, fuck you, I didn't even get started yet, or you're telling me to do what? No, I'm gonna do my own thing. Um, I think that's just a very American spirit. It's also very youthful, experience and phraseology, which a lot of these guys were. They were very young people that were fighting in wars, as most wars. Um, I look up to him because you got to think about everything that these people, and especially all these people, really, when you think about the historical nature of it, uh, these guys gave up like everything. Like John Paul Jones, he wasn't that. First off, that wasn't even his real name. He left his whole family, his whole country, his whole everything behind, and just fled to America because he was like, yeah, this is it, and changed his name and changed everything to be an American. I mean, like, gave up everything. And you look at the immigrants, you look at, all the people that came here since the revolution and made anew for themselves and left everything behind, family and all, to build a new life and arguably a better life in this country than in their home country. So when we look at July 4th and we look at all these people, right? Martin Luther King, Franklin Roosevelt, Theodore Roosevelt, John Paul Jones, all these people, you and then you compare them to us today who are complaining over, someone wanting to use the bathroom or this and that, and we're ripping each other apart over something we saw on Twitter. We have to take a look back and look at what all these people did before us and say, wait a minute, like, are we doing justice to the idea of liberty? Are we doing justice to the ideas of a free country and free and fair elections, by being willing to toss it all away because someone said something we didn't like or um is doing something we find abhorrent? Are we not fighting are we fighting for liberty or are we fighting for repression? Because a lot of the things I've seen lately in this country is people getting to the point where they're okay with suppressing another viewpoint because it doesn't quite fit their own, or ostracizing people because they don't have the same political opinions and they confuse politics with morals. You can be a respectful, kind, empathetic, and understanding individual that respects boundaries and respects clear and concise communication. And you could be all those things and be a Democrat or a Republican. You can hold down a steady job, value family, value God, value all these things, and be a Democrat or a Republican or an independent or a communist. You can do all those things and still be a very moral and upstanding person without having to, those are morals, what I just listed. Political positions such as believing in the right to keep and bear arms, separation of church and state, believing that children shouldn't be on hormone blockers or puberty blockers, and believing that, gay people have a right to get married. Those are political opinions. Those are social opinions. Those aren't morals. Because I've talked to people on both sides of these issues, be it, on the hard right or the hard left, and And some of them have the same morals where it's like, yo, be a decent person, have, respect people's boundaries, be empathetic, hold down a good job, do things for your family, protect yourself, you know, on both sides of the aisle. Those are moral positions. But what a lot of people now are, they're confusing morals with politics. And they say, well, I could tell a lot about your morals with I could tell a lot about your morals from your political stances. And I'm sorry, I can't agree with that unless you're a Nazi or an Islamic extremist. I really can't agree with that. Because if you're a Nazi or an Islamic extremist, that's when it's like, all right, like, that makes sense. That then your morals are kind of showing through your politics. But those are very extreme and rare examples of Islamic extremism being I mean, I'm sorry, very rare and extreme examples of, politics and morals being one subject. For the vast majority of people, you can separate the 2. So, my point is, you have these people that sacrifice everything, and some people the people that are newcomers to this country sacrificing every day. Uh, what can we learn from this? What can we learn from these people that have and continue to sacrifice for their country, for their family, and for themselves to get a better life and obtain freedom and independence? And I think what we can learn is that we can take a chill pill, that we can look at each other for being unique and individual people and not attacking each other for having differences in opinion, and instead looking at each other's sources for inspiration, and that we are all unique individuals collectively trying to achieve freedom and happiness in this land of opportunity, and figuring out how every day to make the United States a better place to live for everyone so they can achieve these goals that, you know, were allowed to even exist and be thought of because there were people on July 4th, 1776, that fought for 10 years and sacrificed everything up to and including their lives and their families' lives for us to have a place to do these things. So happy July 4th, even though it is on the 5th. I was enjoying the day yesterday and enjoying being free and liberal. Not in the political sense, but you know what I mean. And I hope you all did too. And I hope that this leaves you with some uh, recognizance and understanding of I at least think it means to be an American, and learning from the quotes and the stories of these revolutionaries and these people that help build and maintain the United States of America. Until then, this was episode 238 of Backpacking America. Thank you again for listening, and make sure to follow us on Instagram, Twitch, YouTube, Facebook, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever you get your audio based podcasts from. And until next time, see you guys soon.